Wind knifed across the ridgeline, tearing streamers of snow off the cornice and hurling them down into the gully. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of it, an empty, breathless howl over the high white world. Then the mountain lit up. Automatic fire cracked across the bowl, muzzle flashes stuttering from dark rocks and the distant tree line. Rounds stitched through the snowpack where the seal element lay pinned, each burst carving fresh scars into the hillside, snapping past helmets, chewing splinters from the old concrete of the ruined outpost half-buried below. Contact front, high ground, both sides, someone shouted, voice half-swallowed by the wind and gunfire. The team was trapped low in a shallow depression, a broken horseshoe of crumbling walls and scattered boulders, the only cover in a wide white amphitheater. Above them, the high ground wrapped around like a serrated jaw. Rock outcrops on the left, a sparse tree line clawing down the slope on the right. Firing points everywhere. Escape routes, none. It was a textbook kill box. Near the edge of the bowl, flat on his stomach behind a chunk of shattered wall, Mac bled into the snow. The sniper's cheek was still pressed to the cold comb of his stock, breath thrusting in short bursts near the cracked scope. Blood seeped dark through the fabric at his neck and shoulder, warming the snow until it turned pink. His gloved hand twitched near the bolt, like muscle memory couldn't accept what the rest of his body already knew. "Stay with me, big man, stay with me," the corpsman muttered, hands slick as he packed gauze and fought to clamp a tourniquet in the frozen chaos. A round smacked into the wall above them, spraying stone dust down over both men like ash. Mac's eye remained locked on the jagged rim of his scope. Through its fractured glass he could still see hints of the world outside, the angular smear of rock where the enemy counter-sniper had been hiding, the flashes in the tree line, the white void beyond. The rifle lay silent, its long barrel pointing nowhere in particular, like a question hanging in the air. Down in the center of the bowl, their officer moved from cover to cover, keeping low. Hawk's breath plumed in steady bursts as he leaned into his radio, voice hard and clipped. "Vulcan, this is Viper 1. Troops in contact. Troops in contact. Taking effective fire from multiple ridgelines, requesting immediate suppression in case vac, grid follows." Static roared back at him. He twisted a dial, switched frequencies, tried again. "Vulcan, this is Viper 1. Do you copy? Break, break. This is Viper 1 actual." Nothing. Just the hiss of dead air, like the mountain was laughing at him. "Say again, Hawk," one of the team yelled. He lifted his head, eyes scanning the sky. No drones, no fast movers, no comforting thunder of rotors. Somewhere over the horizon, the birds that were supposed to be orbiting them were now holding, leashed by a silence no one understood. "Comms are cooked," Hawk snapped. "Locals good. Long range is gone. Jamming or terrain, I don't care which. We on our own until we fix it." The mountain answered for him. A rising whistle cut through the wind, thin and impossible to ignore. Hawk's gut clenched a second before the first mortar round hit. The blast landed just short of the outpost, kicking a geyser of snow, concrete, and rock into the air. A wave of overpressure rolled through the bowl, slamming into chest plates and rattling teeth. Shards of debris pattered down like hail. "Mortars! Take cover! Take cover!" Hawk roared, already diving behind a broken wall. Another whistle. Another impact. Closer this time, the concussion thudding through the ground like the pulse of some angry god. Shrapnel screamed through the air, clanging off rifles and helmets, chewing fresh holes into the already shattered walls. They were seconds away from being buried or overrun. The impacts were walking toward them, round by round, precise and unforgiving. Up on the slope, hidden behind a fractured boulder barely large enough to shield her from the storm of metal, Reyes tried to slow her breathing. She lay prone in the snow, tucked into the shadow the rock cast, snow caked thick along the front of her plate carrier and helmet, turning her into another pale lump on the mountain. Her fingers clenched around Mac's rifle, knuckles pale under the gloves. Beside her, jammed between the rock and a small drift, sat her pack, its top flap open, loose magazines nested like dull metal bricks inside. Each breath puffed out in short white bursts. She counted them, in and out, in and out, syncing the rise and fall of her chest to the slow, familiar rhythm she'd been taught long ago, in a different desert, under a different sky. In the flattened circle of her sight picture, she watched death line itself up. Down in the kill box, Hawk was moving between fragments of cover, signaling, pointing, cursing into a dead radio. A half-second later, Reyes saw a flicker of movement higher up the opposite ridge, a darker shape amid the pale, a hint of cloth against stone. She shifted just a centimeter, nudged the cracked optic until the silhouette sharpened. The enemy sniper lay snug in a rock crevice, body masked by snow netting and stone, his barrel barely visible. His scope was already settled on Hawk. The man's finger eased onto his trigger, steady as stone. Reyes' world narrowed to that finger. Wind gust, right to left. Range, she'd eyeballed it when she'd first crawled into this hide. Elevation, she could feel it in the way her ears popped. Angle, sharp enough that gravity would play games with her. Scope, cracked, distorted at the edges, but the center crosshair was still true enough if she trusted the memory of where it had been. She let her breath out. Half. Quarter. The thunder from the ball dropped into a muffled backdrop, like someone had closed a door on the chaos and left her alone in a quiet room with a rifle and that finger in her glass. Squeeze, don't jerk. The rifle bucked gently into her shoulder. Downrange, the enemy sniper's silhouette snapped backward. The man's hand flared open, rifle slipping, his body rolling out of the crevice in an ungainly tumble before vanishing down the far side of the rock. Below, Hawk flinched at the crack, instinctively ducking. Nothing hit him. For a brief, impossible heartbeat, the fire chasing him faded. Gun teams on the ridge line pausing as heads snapped toward the echo of Reyes' shot. Somewhere out of sight, a radio squawked, angry and sudden. A voice barked in a language she knew only in fragments. Where is the second sniper? Reyes swallowed. The tremor in her hands didn't match the stillness of her shot. Snow continued to drift lazily off the cornice above, indifferent. She was never supposed to pull a trigger today. She was here to haul their weight, the extra rounds, the spare batteries, the charges, all the ugly, heavy pieces of ammunition that kept other people's hands clean and light. She was just the one who carried the rounds. And yet, in that thin sliver of a moment, she knew, without her, none of them were leaving this mountain. The scene seemed to hang on a single frame, the close-up of her right eye behind the chipped ring of the scope, lashes iced, iris steady. The reflection in the glass showed the distorted bowl below, the scattered figures, the streaks of fire on the ridges. Rewind, the story whispered. This is how she ended up here. The night before, the mountains looked almost gentle. Inside the prefabricated briefing hut, the walls hummed quietly with the generator's effort to push back the cold. A single heater rattled in the corner, blowing lukewarm air that smelled faintly of dust and diesel. Maps and satellite prints covered the whiteboard and table, edges curling. Reyes sat at the back of the room, shoulders hunched in a fleece, notebook balanced on one knee. She might have passed for support staff, one of the random logistics ghosts who drifted in and out of operations and were forgotten 5 minutes later. Hawk stood at the front, a laser pointer in one hand, gloved finger tracing across the terrain, image tape beside it. Objective is here, he said, tapping. The picture showed a tiny black rectangle perched on a knife-edge ridge, surrounded by white and gray. Old listening post. We go in on foot, swap the encrypted drives, pull any salvageable hardware, then demo the rest. Short timeline. We are not hanging around up there. Mac leaned back in his chair, one boot resting on the rung of the one in front of him. What's the latest on local activity? He asked, voice lazy, the way it always was when he already suspected the answer. Hawk nodded to the intel sergeant, who clicked to the next slide. Command says nearest hostile unit is a couple valleys over and nursing their wounds from last week. No confirmed drone or mortar assets within this sector. We're tagged as low risk, high payoff. In and out before anyone cares. Reyes' gaze wandered over the map, tracing the approach route highlighted in red. The path threaded up a broad snowfield, skirted beneath a jagged line of peaks, then cut across to the ridge with the outpost. On the screen, everything looked flat, clean, two-dimensional. Her eyes snagged on something else. A thin, shadowed line snaked up one of the flanking ridges, a narrow couloir, barely visible at first glance. It bit straight up toward a notch overlooking the bowl where the outpost clung, a dark seam in the snow. Routes of approach, someone asked from the front row. Hawk tapped the red line. Primary is along the snowfield, up this spur, and into the compound. Secondary is, we don't need a secondary. We stick to the plan, stick to the timeline. Weather window is tight, extraction window's even tighter. We start at dawn. We're home for late lunch. Everyone's happy. They laughed, or at least snorted. Reyes didn't. She dug a pen into the couloir's printed shape, marking it in her notebook, circling it 3 times. A throat in the mountain, steep and ugly. One of those places you remembered long after you left it. Mule, you writing your memoirs back there? Mac murmured as people stood in scraped chairs. He bumped her shoulder with the back of his hand. Just trying to remember which way is up, she said, folding the notebook. The words came out easier than the feeling behind them. Later, in the armory, the air smelled of oil and metal and the faint tang of burnt powder. Reyes sat cross-legged on the floor with a pile of magazines in front of her, methodically topping them off one by one. She ran her thumb along each stack, feeling for rough edges or damaged casings, then slotted them into rows in the case. Beside her, Mac's rifle lay disassembled on a mat. He lounged on a folding chair, watching as she moved. "You ever gonna let me do my own maintenance?" he asked. "You do your own maintenance," she said. "I redo it." "Cold," he said, but he was grinning. She picked up the bolt and carrier, wiped the old grease, inspected the lugs and gas rings. Her motions were unhurried but precise, fingers knowing every ridge and flaw without needing to look. She'd done this 100 times with this rifle, and others like it, long before the label on her file had been changed from marksman candidate to logistics and support. He watched her reassemble the rifle, the pieces clicking into place with a satisfying finality. She set it on the mat, pulled it to her shoulder, sighted an imaginary target on the far wall, then worked the bolt with her cheek pressed to the comb. "Smooth. Clean. You miss your calling," Max said quietly. Reyes set the rifle back down with care it probably didn't need. "Calling missed me," she answered, just as quiet. The next morning, the world was blue and white. Pale sunlight spilled over the alpine plateau, staining the snow surfaces with faint gold but never quite warming them. The breath of each man and woman in the patrol steamed out in bright clouds as they moved. Some on skis, some in snowshoes, all of them laden with packs and weapons. Reyes trudged near the back, a little apart by habit. Her ruck sat high and heavy, straps digging into her shoulders, the extra weight of ammo cans and spare batteries and coiled demolition line making each step a negotiation. Ahead of her, the core team moved in an easy rhythm, trading quiet jokes between breaths. They'd been doing this together for years. She'd been attached to them for 6 weeks. She kept her eyes on the snow. It was clean enough at first. Their own tracks formed a clear, straight line behind them, a single purposeful scar across the untouched surface. Then, farther out, she saw another set. 2 parallel lines cut across their route at an angle, faint but unmistakable. Ski tracks, older, edges softened by wind. No one had mentioned any friendly patrols up here. She paused mid-stride, squinting, following them with her gaze as they disappeared into a fold of terrain. "Something?" Hawk asked, glancing back. Reyes nodded at the tracks. "Someone else has been moving through here. Skis. Not ours." He studied them for a heartbeat, then checked his watch. "Could be old. Could be shepherds. Could be ghosts. Intel says nearest bad guys are 2 valleys over and licking their wounds." "The wind hasn't buried them yet," Reyes said. "They're not that old." Hawk's mouth tightened, but only for a second. "I hear you. We keep our heads on a swivel. But we're already racing the clock. No detours. Keep moving." She wanted to argue. Instead, she did what her role demanded. She nodded and fell back into line, filing the image away. Later, they paused at a short halt while Hawk checked bearings and adjusted their course. Reyes drifted toward the edge of the stopping point, drawn as if by gravity to the shadowed scar she'd seen on the imagery the night before. The couloir yawned above them, a dark cut in the white flank of the ridge. Up close, it was even steeper than it had looked on the map. Walls rising near vertical for stretches, snow packed deep in some spots and wind scoured to bare ice in others. She walked over, jabbed the tip of her trekking pole into the snow near its mouth. The pole sank to the hilt before meeting resistance. Deep, unstable in pockets. Negotiable if you picked your line and trusted your tools. Thinking of a shortcut? Mac asked, appearing at her shoulder. Thinking of a plan B, she said. He snorted. Plan B is you hauling more ammo when Plan A eats too much of it. Good to know Command has such a broad imagination, she muttered. When they came within sight of the old listening post, she felt the hairs on her neck rise long before any rounds flew. The structure clung to the ridge like a rusted barnacle, its walls half buried in drifts, roof partially collapsed. An old antenna mast lay broken beside it, pointing uselessly at nothing. Around the perimeter, the snow told a story. She saw shallow depressions where rectangular objects had been set and removed recently. Faint arcs that could be footprints filled and softened with new snow, repeating in patterns that looked more like patrol routes than random wandering. Flat spots behind small rises of rock where someone had lain prone for hours, compressing the snow beneath them. It didn't look like wind. Wind was chaotic. This had geometry. Hawk, she said, catching up to him and pointing. He followed her gaze, frowned, then shrugged. Maybe the last tech team took their sweet time getting everything out. The boot prints are fresher than that, she said. And there's disturbed snow where you'd put a firing position, not where you'd carry boxes. Someone's been watching this place. Someone's always watching something, he said. We're on a ridge in contested terrain. Doesn't change the mission. In, out, demo. You see anything with a muzzle, you call it. Inside, the outpost smelled like old dust and cold metal. They found the expected clutter, stacks of obsolete equipment, frost-rimed consoles, cables coiled like sleeping snakes. But laid over it were other signs. Mud tracked on the floor that hadn't had time to fully freeze, a cooking tin still faintly warm to the touch, a cigarette butt ground into the corner. Whoever was here isn't far, Reyes said, touching the side of the tin with a gloved knuckle. Good, Hulk replied. Then they can enjoy the fireworks from a distance. He started assigning tasks, voice crisp. Mac moved to Overwatch, climbing to a crumbling section of wall with his rifle and a small mountain of ammo that Reyes had already pre-staged. Others went to work on panels, pulling encrypted drives, tagging salvageable gear. Reyes did what she was there to do. She hauled ammo boxes from the drop point into the outpost. Charges and DET cord laid neatly where the breaches told her to put them. Spare batteries for radios and demolition initiators. She kept track of what went well like it was a puzzle only she could see. Still, her eyes kept sliding to the windows, to the slivers of white beyond, to the couloir she knew lurked unseen off to one side. The clock kept ticking toward their extraction time. Somewhere, far above them, the wind shifted. The first hint that something was wrong came not from what they heard, but from what they didn't. Hawk was in mid-sentence with higher command when the radio coughed and choked. The clear, distant voice faded into a grainy whisper, then collapsed into a wall of static. He stepped away from the console he was leaning on, frowned, tried another frequency. The same hiss greeted him, constant and uncaring. Mac, you copying Vulcan? He asked over the local net. Negative, came the reply, slightly crackled but understandable. Long range just went to snow up here. Getting some weird spikes on the signal strength meter. Might be terrain. Might be someone playing with a jammer. Terrain my ass, the corpsman muttered. We had clear line of sight 5 minutes ago. Stay sharp, Hawk said. Keep scanning. Everyone else, stay on task. We're not. The mountain cut him off. The mortar round landed just short of the outpost, close enough that the blast slapped the air out of his lungs. The floor jumped under his boots, dust and ice falling from the ceiling in a shimmering haze. Someone cursed. Someone else laughed, too loudly, the edge of panic right under it. Move. Defensive positions. Hawk barked, his body already in motion. Get eyes on that high ground. Reyes dropped the crate she was carrying and sprinted toward the nearest window, sliding into a kneeled position behind a half-wall. Through the frame, the world outside was suddenly full of fire. On the ridges above, she saw muzzle flashes strobe from behind rocks and scrub. Dark figures hunkered down in well-chosen positions, using the terrain like they'd rehearsed it a dozen times. Smoke drifted lazily from the first impact crater, rising in a dainty plume against the white. Mac's voice crackled over local. Multiple teams on the left ridge, more in the tree line right. At least 2 belt feds, one higher, one lower. Mortar teams somewhere back behind that left crest. They've got us in a neat little bowl. The second round arrived, closer, sending a curtain of lethal fragments scything over the compound. Reyes flinched as a shard sparked against the wall near her head, tiny fleck of stone stinging her cheek. Exfil route is getting swept, someone else shouted. They're walking us into the date. Hawk slid in beside Reyes, peering out in a different direction. A round smacked into the concrete between them, spraying their faces with grit. Mac, I need their spots, Hawk said, wiping his eye with the back of his glove. Working it, came the terse reply. Up on his perch, Mac adjusted his scope, breath measured despite the chaos. Through his optics, the battlefield flattened into clean lines and distances. He marked the glints of metal where enemy optics flashed. The muzzle flashes from belt-fed positions tucked into rock shelves, the faint movement around a rise where he suspected the mortar tube was set. Sniper hide at 10 o'clock high. Camo net in that rock seam. Range 800, he said. 2 machine guns, left ridge and tree line right. Mortar team is behind that crest. I can see rounds coming up. They had this place dialed in before we got here. He fired, the report cutting through the din. One of the machine gun positions went silent, the gunner dropping. Another shot. An assistant crumpled, his body collapsing awkwardly over the weapon. For a few seconds, the return fire on that flank faltered. The mortar, however, did not. As the team poured rounds back into the ridges, trying to suppress, Max shifted to get a better angle on the suspected mortar position. It meant leaning over, just a little, exposing more of himself above the shattered parapet he was using as cover. He saw the flash of the enemy sniper's muzzle an instant before his world turned red. The impact felt like a sledgehammer slamming into his neck and shoulder at once. The force spun him partially around, his cheek tearing away from the stock. The cracked scope smashed against the concrete, the lens bursting into a spiderweb of fractured glass. He tasted copper. The sky overhead tilted sideways. Down below, Reyes saw him fall. Max hit, she screamed, already moving. She sprinted out from behind her cover into the teeth of the fire, boots slipping on the snow-slick floor. Rounds snapped past her, biting little puffs into the snow by her feet, whining away into the sky. She dropped low, half-sliding the last few meters to where Mac lay. Blood laced with froth bubbled at the corner of his mouth. He was conscious, barely, eyes wide and glassy. Hey, I got you, Reyes said, hooking an arm under his and dragging him toward a broken wall. The rifle clattered along the ground beside them, leaving a faint groove in the frost. Leave it, Mac coughed, but she was already scooping it up with her free hand, hauling both man and weapon into what passed for cover as the corpsman skidded in beside them. Pressure here, tourniquet there. Move, the medic said, hands working, voice oddly calm. Hawk jammed his radio against his ear, shouting into the static. Vulcan, this is Viper 1. We are under indirect and direct from prepared positions. Repeat, troops in contact, requesting. Static answered him. The jamming was now a steady wall, smothering any hope of long-range reach. Even their encrypted handsets were full of noise and nothingness. God damn it! Hawk slammed the radio into the concrete, then forced himself to breathe. Fine. We do it ourselves. The enemy tightened the noose. Machine gun fire raked the only viable path out of the bowl, bullets stitching across the snow where they would have run. Mortar blasts crept closer to the outpost, each impact sending shards scything through the thin walls, pinning them in place. One of the team took a fragment in the leg and went down with a howl, adding another problem to the pile. Reyes ran. From one broken wall to another, from ammo cache to weapon position. She moved with the single-minded rhythm of someone who had done this job enough to make it pure muscle memory. She slammed fresh magazines into rifles, shoved belts into hungry machine guns, shouted counts over the local net. 200 rounds left on the left gun, 3 mags for the right team. Main stash outside is a no-go, she called. You're burning it faster than I can feed you. Outside, where she'd left the bulk of their ammunition staged in neat rows in the snow, the air was now crosshatched with incoming fire. The crates might as well have been on the moon. During one brief lull as a mortar tube was reloaded, Reyes dared a quick glance over a crumbling section of wall. She watched the mortar impacts with different eyes than the rest. They were close, but not quite as close as they could have been. The rounds were bracketing the compound, not dropping dead center. Enough to shake them, wound them, pin them. Not enough to wipe them out in one well-placed salvo. At the same time, she noticed where the majority of small arms fire was going. Not at the random edges of the outpost. Not at any movement they saw. It was concentrated, unnervingly precise, on the section of the building where the server racks and consoles were. On the people near the equipment. Not a massacre. A net. They are trying to keep us alive, she realized. Just long enough to get to us. She slid back down, heart hammering. They are not trying to kill us, she called to Hawk over the crackle of local comms. Not outright. They want us pinned inside, with the gear. They are focused on the racks and the people working them. Feels pretty lethal from where I'm standing, Hawk shot back, shoving a fresh mag into his rifle. Mortars could flatten this whole place in 30 seconds if they wanted to, she said. They are walking them in slow. They want bodies to recover. They want the drives. He frowned, ducking another boast that chewed into the wall above his head. Intel said this place was a dead asset, he said. This doesn't look like dead to me. Another round impacted, closer than any before, knocking them both to their knees. As Reyes scrambled back up, wiping blood from a shallow cut at her temple, her eyes pulled involuntarily toward the slope on their flank. Up there, somewhere out of sight, the couloir cut its dark line up the ridge. A narrow, ugly throat in the mountain, steep and unforgiving. As options inside the bowl shrank with each blast, that shadowed route, insane, exposed, unapproved, began to look less like a bad idea and more like the only one. And her rifle, the only one that might reach far enough to make it matter, lay sticky with Mac's blood at her side. The roof above them shuddered as another round landed, collapsing a section in a spray of snow and broken wood. A shout turned into a scream on the far side of the building, then into a ragged groan. They were running out of time. We can't sit here and die by inches, Hawk said, dropping into cover near Reyes and Mac. The corpsman was working frantically, plastic wrappers and bits of gauze scattered like confetti around his knees. We can't move, either, another operator said. Every path out's covered. They have the high ground, the numbers, and the drop on us. Only way we're getting out is if we blind them or kill them. Or both, Mac rasped. His voice was thin but sharp enough to cut through the noise. He forced his eyes open, gritted his teeth as the corpsman cinched another bandage. You're supposed to be unconscious, Hawk said. Don't tell me what to do, Mac muttered. He tried to raise his head, failed, and settled for rolling his eyes toward Reyes. You still lugging my rifle around, mule? Reyes glanced down at the weapon lying against her leg. The barrel was streaked with snow and blood, the scope spiderweb from its impact earlier. Yeah, she said. Somebody has to carry your weight. Mac twitched his lips in the hint of a grin, then coughed, a wet sound. Can't see half of what's out there anymore, he said. Eyes full of stars, scopes busted. But I know the picture. They've got us sewed into a nice little package, and they're just waiting to tie the bow. Hawk slammed a fresh mag home, breathing hard. We need Overwatch, he said. We need someone up high to take those guns and that sniper out, or we're never getting off this ridge. But that route is up the couloir, Reyes said quietly. Both men looked at her. She swallowed, feeling the words falling out of her mouth before she could pull them back. I scouted it on the way in. It goes up to a shelf that looks straight down into the bowl. From there, you can see our ridgeline, their ridgeline, and probably the mortar and command element behind them. That thing is a death chute, Hawk snapped. You'd be exposed the whole way. One slip and you're a snowball. One lucky burst and you're paste. It's also how you get above them, she said. We stay here, we die slow. We move across the bowl, we die fast. We go up, maybe we make them die instead. Even if that shelf exists the way you think it does. We don't have a sniper who can, Hawk began. Mac made a sound halfway between a laugh and a groan. Yeah, we do, he said. He grabbed Hawk's sleeve with his good hand, dragging him closer. She's the only one who's ever outshot me on the range, he hissed. Ever. You remember that Qualls week? The one with the weird crosswind and the tiny steel. Hawk hesitated. He had been there. He remembered the way Reyes had quietly punched round after round into a target most of the team had missed, then gone back to loading mags like nothing had happened. He also remembered the notation in her file, the one that had followed her out of sniper school and into logistics. She's not in that billet anymore, he said. And that route. And I'm bleeding all over your outpost. Matt cut him off. I can't see straight. I can't move without passing out. You have a rifle with reach, you have a mule with eyes, and you have a mountain that's about to bury you. Let the mule off the leash. Reyes felt the weight of both their gazes. Felt, too, the other weight sliding up from where she'd buried it years ago. A rooftop in a different country. A narrow street below, full of shadows and hanging wires. A man with a rifle stepping out of a doorway, moving toward a group of soldiers who didn't see him yet. A girl, maybe 8, maybe 10, peeking from behind a car. Too close, too small, too scared. Wind, distance, angle. She'd taken the shot. The man had dropped. The round had passed through, or a fragment had gone wild, or the universe had decided it wanted another casualty that day. The girl's body hitting the ground had sounded like a dropped backpack. The investigation had been merciless. The verdict had been neat. There had been other factors, other rounds in the air, chaos no one could untangle fully. But someone had to carry the stain in their file. Someone with the least stripes, the least clout. So marksman candidate Reyes had become logistics specialist Reyes, and the rifle she knew better than. She knew her own reflection had become something she cleaned and carried for other people. Now Mac's rifle lay warm and heavy against her leg, and the mountain outside was filled with men who wanted to take her team alive and break them into pieces for an audience she would never see. Her heart thudded once, twice. The next breath hurt. I'm not in that job anymore for a reason, she said, voice low. You know that. Hawk's jaw flexed. I read the report, he said. I also read the training scores. And I watch what you did at that range. You think I didn't notice you've been reading the wind for Mac all month? You're here because we needed someone to carry ammo. But maybe that wasn't the only reason. Another mortar round screamed in, close enough that they felt the heat of it. The roof above them shivered again. Somewhere, a beam gave way. Dust and flakes of snow cascaded down in a choking curtain. Another teammate shouted, the sound abruptly cut off. Extraction windows closing. Someone yelled over local. Air says they're not coming in while the jamming's this heavy and those guns are up. Hawk looked at Reyes. There was a decision there she'd never seen before, brittle and raw. You're scared? He asked. Terrified, she said honestly. Good, he replied. People who aren't scared do stupid things. You're not going up there to be a hero. You're going up there to do a job. Can you do it? Her mouth was dry. Somewhere inside, the memory of that rooftop uncurled, sharp and ugly. She saw, too, Matt coughing blood, the Corman's strained face, the way the others looked at her without really seeing her. She looked down at her hands. They weren't steady, but they knew what to do. Yeah, she said finally. I can do it. She grabbed the rifle, slung it across her back, and began stuffing magazines into her pouches with ruthless efficiency. She picked the best of what she had left, enough to make each round count, not so many that they'd drag her down on the climb. Take more, Hawk said, nudging another stack toward her. If I take more, I move slower, she replied. If I move slower, I die before I get there. Then it doesn't matter how much I'm carrying. He hesitated, then nodded. Stay on local. If you can punch that jammer and those guns, I might be able to get air back in play. And if I can't? She asked. He checked his rifle, eyes hard. Then we'll make them pay for every inch while we're still breathing. Reyes pulled her goggles down, adjusted her helmet. The world shrank to the white glare outside and the storm of noise rattling the walls. She picked a gap in the rear of the outpost where a section of wall had long since crumbled. Snow spilled through, forming a short ramp up to the slope beyond. For a moment, she stood there, feeling the weight of the rifle settle into the familiar groove along her back. The last time she'd carried one like this into a fight, a child had not walked away. The fear of repeating that hung around her like another layer of gear. Then another mortar round landed close enough to bow the floor, and a scream of pain cut through the net as someone else went down. Function over fear, she told herself. She slipped out into the open. The cold hit her like a slap. Wind clawed at her clothes, tried to push her sideways. Rounds snapped overhead, the enemy adjusting fire as soon as they saw movement at the rear of the compound. She dropped low, almost crawling, using tiny shelves and drifts as cover, threading her way toward the mouth of the couloir. The mountain loomed above, its shadow swallowing her as she crossed into the darker, steeper world of the gully. The noise from the bowl dulled, turning into a distant, angry roar. Ahead of her, the couloir rose like a narrow throat to the sky. She strapped on her crampons with fingers that had done this 1,000 times in training but never under this much fire. The metal teeth bit into the first sheet of ice with a satisfying crunch. She started to climb. Each step was a careful negotiation between gravity, gear, and will. She kicked in, tested each placement, pushed up. Her gloves bit into rock edges as she used her hands to steady herself, sometimes pulling, sometimes simply trusting the feel of stone under her skin. Every few meters, a round would crack nearby, chipping rock or sending a puff of snow into the air. The shooters on the ridges knew someone had moved, but they didn't yet know where. Their fire was probing, not precise. Halfway up, she swung her axe into a fragile seam of ice, trusting it more than it deserved. As she shifted her weight to that arm, a burst of fire stitched across the couloir beneath her, one round striking the rock just below her left foot. The impact shattered the edge of her foothold. For a fraction of a second, she was weightless. The axe held. Her boots slipped, scraping along the ice. Her body swung out, away from the wall, dangling by one arm. She tasted panic like metal. Her world became her grip and the screaming protest in her shoulder. She bayed her teeth, dragged in a breath, and swung one boot back against the wall, blind and desperate. The crampon caught, bit, then the other, bit again. She hauled herself back onto the narrow snow ledge, chest heaving, stomach lurching. For a long moment, she pressed her helmeted forehead against the rock, feeling the tremors run through her muscles. You wanted Plan B, she told herself thickly. Congratulations. You're in it. She climbed. Time blurred. The siren call of the bowl below faded into a constant background rumble. Her world shrank to the next placement, the next ledge, the next patch of stubborn ice. The rifle bounced against her back with each movement, reminding her with every shift that she was carrying both salvation and failure on her shoulders. At last, the couloir eased. The walls opened slightly. The slope tilted back just enough that she no longer felt like she was scraping her way up the inside of a chimney. Ahead, a small, wind-carved shelf jutted from the ridge, its surface scoured bare in places, drifted deep in others. She crawled onto it on hands and knees, then flattened herself against the snow, panting. The wind hit her full in the face again, dragging tears from the corners of her eyes that froze almost instantly. She rolled onto her side, shrugged off the pack, and slid Mac's rifle down in front of her. For the first time since she'd left the compound, she let herself look. From this vantage point, the valley unfolded like a blueprint. She could see the bowl where the outpost sat, the broken walls now looking terribly small. She saw her team's positions as faint flickers of movement and muzzle flashes. She saw the enemy sniper hide where she'd just killed his replacement, an empty crack in the rock. Now, save for a smear of darkest snow. Beyond, further back along the ridge, she saw the hump of earth and rock where the mortar team had emplaced their tube, rounds stacked in neat lines beside it. She saw the twinkle of optics when machine guns tracked and fired, one over the exfil corridor, another sweeping the outpost's approach. She saw, too, a small canvas tent near a parked vehicle farther down the ridge, a low lump in the snow, barely visible but for the tangle of cables snaking out to a directional antenna. A man stepped out, shouldering a pack unit with an aerial, the jammer. Closer to the base of the ridge, hidden to anyone at ground level, a cluster of figures hunched over a field map spread across a crate. One of them barked orders into a handset, gesturing sharply. The command cell. Everything she'd suspected in the bowl was now painted in detail before her. She wriggled forward, carving a shallow trough in the snow to lower her profile, then settled behind the rifle. She dug her pack under the butt as an improvised rear rest, adjusted her body until the sights lined up naturally on the valley without strain. She flipped open the scope caps. The damage was worse than it had looked in the chaos below. The main lens bore a spiderweb of cracks emanating from one brutal impact point. The glass distorted the image around the edges, warping distances, bending straight lines into subtle curves. The very center, though, remained usable, barely, a small, relatively clear circle where the reticle drifted. She felt, instead of saw, the old frustration surge up. Nothing was clean, nothing was simple. She wiped the lens with a cloth, clearing the frost. It didn't fix the fractures. "Okay," she whispered. "You're ugly, but you're all I've got." She dialed the magnification down, widening her field of view, relying on low power and a brain that remembered distance tables like song lyrics. She noted the flags of blowing snow, felt the wind on her face, watched the tiny puffs where rounds hit and threw powder. Inside her head, numbers slid into place. She checked her magazines. Not many. Enough if she didn't squander them. Not enough if she did. She laid her cheek against the stock, thumb resting lightly along the grip, finger off the trigger. The mountain thrummed beneath her, alive with noise and fury. Her fear had not gone anywhere. It sat in her chest, heavy as a stone. But for the first time since that rooftop, something else sat beside it. Function. She found the enemy sniper hide in her glass, the empty seam of rock where a man had lain minutes ago. She moved her sights along the ridge until another shooter came into view. This one with a rifle only slightly heavier than a standard infantry weapon, but lying prone in a way that said he thought he could reach farther than most. She exhaled. Down in the bowl, the team fought and waited. Up on the shelf, one rifle settled, one eye narrowed, one pair of hands that used to only carry rounds prepared to fire them instead. The kill box below was about to change sides.